Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of the Backyard Banter Podcast. We're back after a little week hiatus while I was out there seeing the world on the road trip, and we're back, episode 29 here. Before we get started, I definitely just want to say, heart goes out to the people that are affected by which we're all affected by what happened in Orlando yesterday, and really. Still kind of heavy on my heart. Didn't tweet much about anything yesterday. Just kind of spent the day off social media and just, reflecting and everything. But, unfortunately, the world keeps moving. So we're here talking on the podcast, talking about life experiences, and hopefully we can provide a little outlet to get people through times like this and in reflection and everything. And to help us do that, not to put too much pressure on my guests here, but we have a great guest on today. It's George Kritikos from Dynasty League Football. I think I nailed that last name.
100%, man.
Perfect. He's the host of two podcasts, the newly rebooted Dynasty League Football podcast and also the Dynasty League Football Film Metrics podcast. That's a lot on your resume there, George. But how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. And no, it was a great intro. It definitely was a tough one yesterday, and it was my wife's birthday yesterday, so that was not really the day that that we envisioned waking up to. But you compartmentalize that a little bit and kind of lead forward. But no, man, great to be on. I'm a big avid listener of the show and have enjoyed all 28 preceding episodes. So yeah, I'm excited to have my chance now.
Yeah, George tweets out, I feel like almost every episode, which is very kind. And obviously his sucking up got him on the podcast eventually.
Yeah, that persistence pays off and all that fun stuff. So if you need a title, you can start there, and then we'll see if something better comes along through the next hour.
Oh, perfect. Well, I never like to pick the title that the guest recommends, so that's automatically off the list. But no, George is really good writer. He's good numbers analytics mind in the football world, and we're definitely going to talk about that as well. But before we get there, I always ask the guest to start off, George, how did you come to kind of fall in love with football, fantasy football, the lot? Take us through that part of your story.
Yeah, sure. So, I started playing probably in the mid 90s. I was young and I went with my uncle to a fantasy football draft and really liked the idea. And so the next year he got an empty team, someone had left the league and I was able to join in. And so that's kind of how I started, doing redraft. And then, went to college and all that fun stuff and started working a lot. And in the meantime, did a little bit of blogging. I think back in the early aughts, Fox Sports used to have a blog platform, and I don't know if they still do, but used to do some just for fun, write some stuff on there and kind of hone all that type of stuff. And then, honestly, I left a job a couple years ago, and that's what got me into the fantasy football writing part of it was I was in one of those 80, 90-hour weeks, stressful type of jobs, and found a new role at a new company and had all this time on my hands. And my wife was girlfriend at the time, but now wife, she just said I don't want you sitting at home all day after work and bothering me. So find something else to do. and so, yeah, I just started kind of blogging on my own. And then the Dynasty League guys reached out to me. They had an opening and it just kind of worked out really nice, and been doing it the last couple of years. And, I love the leagues and I love playing, but honestly, the analysis for me is the funnest part, which might be a little bit counterintuitive to many of your guests. And we can obviously get into that and nerd out a little bit more, but we'll just kind of leave that there right now.
No, I definitely want to talk about that because that is interesting because I kind of feel the same way in a certain sense. But so we'll definitely talk about that. So how long have you been at DLF now? Because I feel like we might have followed each other before you were there, or maybe I'm not sure though.
So yeah, I think we were probably following each other right around the time maybe I started, because it's been about 2 years now. But I was reading your stuff back then. I think you were kind of winding up at that time, and I was getting started. So it was nice, like you and I think Graham Barfield, who you had on a couple episodes ago, were two of the first people that I connected with. And so yeah, it was nice. Honestly, that's been a huge benefit for me of doing this the last couple of years, is connecting with a bunch of people with like-minded interests, but also I've had a chance to meet some people in person. That's always fun too, to kind of just get to know people in general, even outside of the football context.
Yeah, that's definitely nice, and it's cool to make those real life connections. Like I stayed with Sigmund Bloom and Matt Waldman while I was on my road trip, and it's just cool to have that. And I met Seth Cox from the Draft Breakdown podcast in Arizona as well, and the fantasy footballers. Shit, I met a lot of people while I was on the road that I follow on Twitter. So it's really cool, and just kind of again speaks to that that community aspect. So it was really just for you. You started writing essentially just because you needed something to not bother your girlfriend about?
Well, I mean, I always had a passion for it. And I mean, I forget who it was on one of your episodes, but someone was talking about, when they had their leagues, they used to do like spreadsheets and all these crazy things to prep for leagues. And I was one of those people too. I'm a big Excel person, and SPSS and some of those other fun acronyms that people are like disgusted by, which is fine. But then, I needed to find an outlet, and honestly, working 80, 90 hours a week was making me a pretty grumpy person. So doing something like this gives me a creative outlet. And then it also just honestly, like, I enjoy it. I don't take it too emotionally, I think maybe some of the other people do. And because of that, maybe I just get a lot of joy out of it. And it just makes it a great experience. I don't know. I guess I like to do stuff, but I like to make sure that one, I have the time to do it and do it well, but also two, that I know that I'm going to enjoy it. Because if I didn't enjoy this, I'd quit, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. Well, everybody, if you're not doing it like full time, especially, it's like you're never doing it for the money. Even when you're doing it full time, you're not doing it for the money. Let me just say that. But yeah, so it's pretty interesting. So what exactly is your like day job background? I guess I would.
Yeah. So I got my MBA probably in 2008 now. So God, I feel old, but I'm not really that old. So I got my MBA in 2008. I worked at Walgreens in their corporate office for like 6 years. Hopefully they don't listen to this, but I'm not gonna say anything bad about them. It's okay.
It's not a sponsor of the show.
Yeah, exactly. So I worked there for a while, and I used to travel a lot on the road and worked a lot of long hours, weekends, holidays, all that stuff. So, and a lot of what I did was analytics, and that's why, my football writing kind of reflects that. And then I switched companies twice, and now I get to work from home, which is great. And it's still kind of very analytics focused. And again, it all kind of plays into my football background. I think for some people, they like to find a creative outlet that maybe is completely different from what they do. But apparently I just kind of keep liking to do the same thing, which maybe is a reflection of the fact that I enjoy the work I do, not just the football stuff.
Yeah, I think that is a positive reflection of it. And when your brain just like fires off in a certain way, I feel like it bleeds into every part of your life. Even kind of like, I don't know, I feel like sometimes I approach my personal life in the same way that I do some of my work, which might be good or bad. It depends. Who knows? But that's really interesting in terms of the analytics and everything that goes into that, because that's kind of one thing that I wanted to bring you on to talk about, because there is so much, like, more and more we're hearing analytics thrown around, and whether it's in a positive or negative way, or even just a neutral way, it's definitely in our faces a lot more. What does analytics in football mean to you, George?
Yeah, there's a very big question that you just asked. I know that, like, everyone has different interpretations of it, and like, what is its place in the NFL and also in fantasy and all that. Honestly, to me, it's all different tools, right? I mean, I kind of mentioned my background a bit, and I think of film and analytics very similar to kind of where I've worked in the past. A lot of what I've done is retail based. So, for every store and every location that maybe like a Walgreens has, there's people in that store, and they think that they know their customers, and they think that they know everything that's being sold and everything like that. And I agree, they do, and they have a certain intellect and knowledge of the things that they see. And I compare that to film. And then with analytics, I see it as like just a way to kind of take all this information that's being collected through them, through other people, and provide other opinions. And I think sometimes, and in many cases, it matches up. And we can get into the filmetric stuff, because I think that kind of plays into it a bit. But then I also think that, it's again, just like a tool to help give people information to make an informed decision. And honestly, I'd rather have a full toolbox than to just have one hammer to try to do everything.
Yeah, and that full toolbox is kind of exactly like you mentioned the Filmetrics podcast. What's so unique about it? If you haven't listened yet, definitely, you can subscribe on iTunes. I do. I listen to every episode those guys put out. What you and Nick Whalen, another one of DLF's writers, do. Like he has a coach's background. He's very like film heavy, like, the eye in the sky, what he sees, that sort of stuff. And you approach it from a more numbers based perspective. And you guys talk, like, we'll cover like 4 or 5 players an episode, and like dig into the film observations and the numbers and see where they are similar, where they collide, where they disagree, that sort of thing. So what was the impetus to start that podcast for you guys?
Yeah, I think Nick was trying to do some number stuff. I was trying to do some film stuff, and I think we both realized we're just not very good at wading into the other person's area, and we both enjoy it. I mean, I know Nick has a passion for the numbers, whether it's from me or just looking at it on his own, just like I do with film. And I think it was just a good way for us to kind of get the kind of trained eye, so to speak, of someone else, and then be able to almost validate our own observations. So like if I saw something on film, I didn't feel super comfortable that I was right. I kind of thought I was, but having someone like Nick kind of confirm something for me, or just say, no, you're looking at this totally wrong, that was kind of nice. And then I think those discussions just kind of led us to the idea, and it just made a lot of sense, especially considering there's a little the analytics community and all that. So yeah, I mean, and Nick and I are friends, and we actually live about 20 minutes away from each other. So we're maybe a little too close.
Well, hey, I mean, it shows in the podcast though, some of like, I think, what do you call him, like mom on a couple episodes or something?
Yeah. We live a little bit of different lifestyles. I think my Scotch drinking might scare him a bit, which is okay.
Whatever, man.
I'll like send him pictures in hotels of hotel bars, and I have a glass of Scotch. And he's like, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. I'm like, yeah, I know. I'm like, I'm okay.
Give me a break.
Yeah,
give me a break, Nick. That's awesome. Well, I think I would definitely align with more of your side of that lifestyle than the other, but that's for a separate podcast discussion.
Yeah.
So but it's really interesting. I like the idea, because I have to tell you, George, like, just and everybody listening too, if there's one thing that just completely like bores me at this point, is like the film versus numbers war. Like at this point, I can't even begin to describe how like over that I am.
Yeah, and honestly, it doesn't make much sense, because the objective's the same, right? We all want to figure things out. We're just using different ways to get there. So whether it's a great film person like Matt Waldman, for example, or a great numbers person like a Kevin Cole, I mean, they're trying to solve the same question. It's just they have different methods to get there. It's like, so why not bring as much of it together as we can? People are probably already reading both sides of it. There's no reason not to bring it together in one platform.
Well, and Sigmund Bloom has mentioned this to me for years. This analogy. I know he's said it several other places too. He really compares like kind of football Twitter or the industry to like a big academic department, and and I think it's a really good analogy, because just like in an academic department, you have people like coming from it from different perspectives, like all trying to like work on the same subject matter, but coming into it with like, this is my approach, this is my methodology. And even like in a professional school background, like in a university, like they all still they're under the same curriculum. There's not like the little like kind of like catty infighting, that there is on Twitter, which I just find to be like so strange. And like you said, really counterintuitive because it's just different approaches. Like I think there's just like, I don't know what it is, like whether it's just, I don't know what the objective is to being divisive about it.
Yeah, it's funny, because I think that's a great analogy, because you think about even a specific field of study, whether it's psychology or math or science or whatever, they're all trying to advance the field, right? It's all for like the better collective. And I don't think that always is the case with fantasy football. I think it should be. But I get that there's overlap and everyone wants to be the best in their field. But I think the way you do it is more a result of how good your work is, not necessarily disparaging the work of others.
Yeah, and it's just also kind of realizing that your methodology doesn't have all the answers, that you can't fill. I think that's the biggest thing that I always say that about reception perception, that it's like, it's just one piece of the puzzle. I happen to think it's a pretty good piece of the puzzle. That's why I do it. But that there are other guys out there doing work that answer different questions than the ones that I answer, or frame the answer to the question in a different way.
Yeah, and I think I didn't want to be the first to say reception perception on your episode. I wanted you to be the one to broach that, because I didn't want to glide hand you or anything. No, I'm just kidding.
That's one of the podcasts.
No, but I mean, it's a good example, right? Because it has an objective, but then there's other work out there that's incremental to it, and I think finding a more comprehensive result is always going to be better than just relying only on the one source, regardless of how good the source is.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, and with football, I don't know. You can kind of give your opinion on this. It's hard for me. There are some numbers that I think don't matter. Just like I think there are some film observations that don't matter, because it's hard to isolate. It's hard to isolate like a statistic when there are so many variables going on in football, and I think like a lot of stats have a lot of noise to it. I mean, whether it's your most basic stats, that's pretty intuitive, that yards and even yards per attempt or yards per reception, there's a lot of other variables in just the one player. But so how do you kind of work with that when there is so many other variables going into one statistic? Like how do you know what to account for and what not to?
Yeah, it gets crazy because then there's also like all the created, statistics and things like that get even more complicated. Like, hey, here's the score to help measure this, so it gets even crazier and crazier. And I mean, for me, I always like to start at the most granular level. So it's, individual plays, play log data, that type of stuff. For me, that's always helpful for the way that I begin like an analysis of a player or a position or whatever the work I'm doing is, just because that's at the most simplest level going to give you, information, right? And then you can kind of build up from there. So, Rich Freebar is a guy who does a great job with, hey, yeah, this person was the RB12, but let's start breaking down how they did it by week and what plays contributed to it. So I think, that granular piece is always the best way to start, I think. And I'm sure the film guys probably have a very similar approach, right? Where you're looking at individual plays. You're not just necessarily saying, well, it's this game and that's it. Like you're looking at individual plays from different games, and it creates a better picture than, hey, let's just focus on the Dallas game. Doesn't make much sense. So yeah, there's a lot out there, and it's kind of scary. And honestly, at some points there are people who put things out and it's a little concerning that they don't necessarily provide context in terms of how is this important to whatever it is that their objective is in this article, or your objective is in reading the article.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is, like, people will put out a statistic or anything, and I'm like, why does that matter? Or how did you get there? Or like, yeah, what's the evidence to show me that this is an important piece of data? And at the same time, the thing I love so much about analytics, and especially when it comes to quantifying what you see on film, like with what I do, what Graham Barfield, you mentioned, is doing a great job with running backs now, and Waldman does in the RSP, is that it keeps you honest. It keeps you, because there's so much that your brain will play tricks on you when you're watching film. Steve Palazzolo talked about that in his episode. Like, your brain remembers the high highs and the low lows, and that is absolutely true. There's nothing that grates me more. I think the most annoying thing to me is when somebody puts out like an evaluation on a player, and he's like, well, he gets brought down on first contact too much, or this guy never gets open. I'm like, okay, but what do you mean? Like, like, how often is too much? And why does that, like, what does that compare to other people? Or he doesn't create enough separation. Like, what do you mean? I don't know. You can't just say it. You have to be some sort of log of it to me.
Well, and not that I want to pick on people, because people do it and it's fine. People pick an individual play or pick an individual statistic to make a point. Like you said, and it's like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But statistics, just like film, is open to interpretation. What may be good for one player isn't necessarily good for another, and that's okay, because maybe they win in a different way. Maybe a Theo Riddick and a Marshawn Lynch shouldn't have the same, I don't know, broken tackle numbers, because they just do it differently. But maybe they do, but the way they get it is different. So it's just kind of funny, right? Like, you can sit there and try to cherry pick and come up with something just to enforce your own conclusion, or you can go in with an idea and then maybe it just proves you completely wrong. And hopefully that's the way that you go about it, because that's what's going to teach yourself and honestly everyone else as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And it's just, I mean, everybody says numbers lie, and you can use numbers to make up some bullshit, but your brain also completely lies to you when you're just watching a game. And so there's a lot of like, I don't know, there's a lot that you have to get through. And it just, again, it seems kind of like counterintuitive to me that people are fighting about that, because no methodology is perfect. And I think things have gotten better, but like, it just, I don't know, there's still some, there will always be, I guess, in our field, like a little bit of that, for whatever reason.
Yeah,
but,
and I know you've talked about it before. I want to say it might have been TJ Hernandez, maybe was one who was talking about it, but you had a couple people on who talked about, in the last couple of years, how much the community has exploded in terms of the sheer volume of content out there and the number of websites and everything else. And I think everyone's trying to be first, and that's not really important. Bright is the right way to say it either, but it's about being the most thorough and the most willing to share your conclusions with your audience. I think is more important, and that's where it gets a little bit contested, where and the dynasty community is a great example, because there's so many dynasty websites out there now, and everyone's just trying to find the new thing or come up with the new theory or the new way to draft people or whatever it is. And it's like, that's not as important as informing people of what's out there and what's happening. And hey, yeah, here's this new theory, but you don't need to try to shoehorn it into, this off season because you want to try to get something before the season starts.
Yeah, for sure. That's one thing that's really important. Like if you're creating some sort of methodology or theory or something, like give it a little time to marinate, before you put it out there. Like, or else you might end up thinking that Cordero Patterson is good.
Yeah, I might have been guilty of that for a hot minute, but yeah.
Oh no, I mean, I'm obviously I'm talking about myself too. So
yeah. We're see, look, film metrics all coming together, man.
Yeah, it's all, we're all prone to making mistakes, and it helps to have a little time to let things simmer, like I said. But no, I think that's a really good discussing point. And it, like I said, if you haven't checked out the Film Metrics podcast, it's definitely a good kind of illustration of the ideal marriage between the two, even if the personalities behind it have a little bit of differences in their lifestyle.
Yeah, just a little, but it's okay.
Nah, that's all good, man. So, kind of getting a little bit more back to you as a person. I think that, I've had a few people on my show that are, doing it part-time and like kind of want to do it and, would like to do it full time. And then there's some others that are like Denny Carter mentioned, like he just does, like he wanted that. Now he doesn't, and there's been a lot of differences in that. Where do you kind of stand on that? Obviously, like, it seems like you have a pretty good setup in your real job right now, and you have time otherwise, but where do you kind of stand on that thought?
Yeah. It's you know what, I go back and forth with it all the time, but my wife and I, we've been married for 2 years now. And one of the big things, even when we started dating, was we both kind of wanted to make sure we're pursuing our passions, whether it's professionally, personally, all that stuff. So, over the last 5 years that we've been together in total, she's switched careers twice. I've switched jobs multiple times. She's going for a PhD now, which is something she always wanted to do. The fantasy football writing was something I wanted to do for a long time. So we're very big on trying to, pursue our goals, but then also understand the context of the rest of our lives. We moved up to Milwaukee now because of my wife's program. We lived in downtown Chicago before that because that's what I wanted to do. She probably was not as keen on that as I was. Mm-hmm. So that's okay. But to get back to your question, right now I'm happy with it being part-time. I think if the right opportunity came up, I'd always be interested, but I don't think I have a preference. Like you said, I mean, I'm very fortunate where I have a professional job that pays me well, gives me the flexibility to do football, to do work, to work from home, to travel to conferences and all that fun stuff. And then, the football stuff has been great. I love all the people I get to communicate with and talk about, football and life, honestly. But, right now, probably happy with where I am. But you know, again, I think I just want to be open-minded, and whatever the next adventure is, I'm totally happy to take it. My wife wants to live abroad, and my company does work overseas in a few places that she really wants to live. So maybe that's the next thing, but we don't really know.
Cool.
Yeah, it's I don't know, man. I kind of just live. I tell my wife I live every year like it's my best year, and I've felt that way honestly the last 10 or 11 years. Which is awesome. Yeah. And I don't know. I guess I just kind of let things happen, man. And I know I sound very hippy dippy right now, and that's funny because I wear a suit like when I go to conferences and stuff, so they probably don't think that at all. But no, I don't know. I'm just very happy with where things are.
Hey, I'm right. I'm on that. If you're gonna go down the hippy dippy, like now we're on the same wavelength for sure, man. But I think it's really interesting, like. But also when you're part-time and you have a full-time job that really is demanding, and you have a wife too, like God, that's the one thing that I'm gross. How do you fit that into the schedule? But so there is a lot that goes into like fitting, being as thorough and in depth and making good work as you do. There's a lot of, like, I guess, would you call it sacrifices or just differences?
And we have, I don't want to say we have, but I definitely make it a point to get off of Twitter and get off of all the football stuff after, like, if it's during the week, in the evenings, it's her and I every night. We like to do stuff together, so we make sure that's the case. So if you look at my Twitter activity, you see very little between the times of like 5 p.m. and like maybe 9 or 10 p.m. because we like to spend our time together. But as far as, I write Fridays and Saturday nights. I'll edit the podcasts. I get up early. I stay up late. It's a bit of a sacrifice, but I don't look at it that way because I enjoy it so much. I just think of it more like I said earlier, I always try to be, the things that I do, I try to do very well. And if I felt like I wasn't doing something well anymore, whether it's being a husband or doing my job or the fantasy football stuff, I would adjust accordingly. But I'm pretty lucky. I have a nice flexible schedule and a very understanding wife who's off teaching yoga right now. But
yoga.
Yeah.
Jealous.
Yeah. She left her law practice to teach yoga. So she took a big leap there and then now is a PhD student. So it's we kind of, like I said, a little bit of a wave, up and down wave lifestyle of highs and lows, but it's all fun, man. And it's I don't know. I don't look at it as sacrifices, I guess. I just look at it as it's all fun and I enjoy it, and I just find the time, but I always try to put my wife first. I can't say I always put her first. I always try to.
Yeah, I would.
and I know your opinions on it, and it's funny because the way that you talk about getting married and stuff is probably the way I talk about having kids, which is I don't want to.
Oh, gross. Yeah.
And not that hey, other people have kids and they're great kids and that's awesome, but my wife and I aren't going to do that, and we get a lot of weird looks for that, and that's okay because we're really happy with where things are. And
that's the thing, like I feel like not everybody should have kids. That's the problem. Like, there's a lot of people that have kids that I'm like, man, you really should give those to someone else. We could get down that rabbit hole. You go to any Walmart and I feel like there's at least one parent there that you could question their parenting. But honestly, like, we like what we do, and we always say, like, the difference between like having a kid and if we decide we change our mind, that's a little easier to do than like you get married and then you decide to get divorced, right? Like, I mean, that's a little tougher maybe than having a kid and then saying, oh crap, I maybe shouldn't have had this kid. That's why we're like, hey, let's hold off and down the line, if it's the right choice, there's plenty of kids in need that we'd be happy to take part, and adopt or whatever it might be. But I know I'm getting a little heavy there, but no. But I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, like, you go into a Walmart and you question a lot of people's parenting choices. The only reason, like, I ever have any inclination to have a child, and I don't have, I mean, for one, I don't have a partner to have a child with right now. That is an important variable. But I always say, like, the only reason I ever like have an inkling to have a kid is because I want to like raise a kid the right way and be like, see,
that's where you're supposed to, which is a terrible reason to have children.
I can't make fun of Walmart too much. I actually interned there in Arkansas 10 years ago. So I probably shouldn't make too much fun because I still have friends there. But yeah, I mean, you know, like I said, we're not there, but you know, we're happy, man, and that's what matters. And I always tell my wife, like, we're enjoying life, so no need to plan it out too much. You know, sometimes just better let things happen.
Yeah, and so I feel like you have to in order to do like what we do, because it is such a, I don't even know how to describe it. Like anytime I try to like describe, you know, Twitter or even just like what I do on a day-to-day basis, like to somebody from, you know, the opposite sex, or even one of my friends, they're like, what is wrong with you? Like, what do you talk? So you talk all day with a bunch of people that you don't know? Or I'm like, well, kind of, but, and I feel like in order to and just like how much time actually goes into being good at this, or somewhat good, appearing to be good at it. It takes, like, if you're going to have another person in your life, like you do, it takes like kind of that same sort of mindset. And I feel like from your description of you and your wife's relationship, like you both are kind of like have a lot of passions. You have like, you know, careers and everything, but like being able to spend that time, like you said, just ride that wave together. I think you have to have somebody that understands, I think.
Oh yeah. Yeah. She's always a very big multitasker, but not like in the workaholic way, just like I am. And, you know, we have fun with it. And, you know, it's a hard balance sometimes, but you figure it out. And luckily, like DLF, where I do my stuff, they're so good about, hey, you know, if life is a little bit overwhelming right now, just figure it out and take your break and come back. You know, we've had so many writers that have, you know, Leo Pasiga took a year off, who's a great writer, and just came back recently. You know, I think his son was in his last year of high school or something. He wanted to spend more time with him and kind of took the year off from writing. And hey, that's awesome, man. I think you got to prioritize things and do it right, because, you know, kind of like what I said to you before we started was, you know, if you do something and your heart's not in it, the people notice, you know, and whether it's a podcast or it's an article or it's, you know, doing the fantasy football thing in general, people are going to notice, and they notice the people who really have a passion for it. And I think that's why you've become popular, why people like Matt Waldman or Evan Silva or Sigmund or, you know, I'm not calling myself popular, but I mean, even why people read my work or listen to my podcast at all, I think it's because they know that I prepare and I really put everything I can into all the things that I do. So, you know, that's important, man. I mean, you know, you don't want to treat people like they're dumb, because they're definitely not. They understand, and they can tell, you know, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, whether it's on Twitter or especially in podcast form, I feel like you can always tell who's into it and who's not. You know, it's like talking to a person in real life. You can tell when, all right, this person really doesn't want to be talking to me right now. I can tell that they're over this conversation, you know, and it's the same way if you're like listening into a conversation on a podcast, I feel like. So, you know, it's a very good point. It's
like when you sit on the plane and there's that guy next to you who like really wants to engage you in a conversation, and you're just like, I'm not interested. You know, that it's kind of like that, you know, people can kind of tell. Well, those people can't, but like,
yeah, those people do not know.
So, yeah, I mean, I think most people can tell. So, I mean, hopefully I come across that way, and I think you do. And honestly, like a lot of the people that I've been fortunate enough to kind of, you know, I can tell, like, I mean, I have great conversations with a ton of people about football and non-football, and you can tell who takes joy in this and in life in general, because it transposes, you know, if you're not happy doing your professional job, or if you're doing this full time, if you're not happy doing it, it shows everywhere.
Yeah. It really does. It's funny, the airport thing. Like that's one place where I love talking to people. I love meeting new people, and just I'll talk to almost anybody at any time. But if there's one place like I'm just not interested in interacting with people, it's like in an airport or on the airplane. It's like number one place I should just wear a shirt that says "No, thank you."
Yeah. It's not the best social environment.
No, it's just a lot of people just doing. I don't know. People like. I feel like people like check their brains at the door sometimes at airports too. Like, just some things that, oh man, it's frustrating.
Well, yeah, I think that like just going through the whole process of the airport and like, if you take a morning flight, especially, they've been up since 4 or 5 in the morning.
Yeah.
They're not ready to be, very socially engaging, versus the guy at the bar who's, ordering a beer and watching a game. They're a little more likely to give you some actual conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. George, a couple more questions here for you. One thing I know that I definitely wanted to ask you on the podcast, a couple months ago, or I think it was back in April or May, you sent me a piece that you wrote about your family and some of how some of the struggles that has been present in that relationship, especially as it relates to your wedding and your wife and everything. And it was funny because not funny, it was rude of me.
No,
when I read it back in April, and then when I DM'd you to come on the podcast, it's like, oh damn, I forgot to respond and because I said, I was like, oh yeah, dude, I'm definitely gonna read this later, and I did, and then I forgot to message you back. Whoops. There's a little thing about Matt Harmon, very bad at getting back to people on certain things. But it was a really good story. It was really well written. But it was tough. It's kind of if you're comfortable as much as you are, kind of go into the details of that, what you sent me there.
Yeah. First off, appreciate, the kind words on the article and everything. And honestly, at first I wrote it because, a lot of things kind of going in my head, and it was a nice cathartic experience just to get the things down on virtual paper, if you will. So my wife and I, like I said, have been married for 2 years now. And, my relationship with my parents and my siblings, I have a brother and a sister, are pretty tenuous. They were, I should say. And we got engaged, and my parents were a little disappointed the route that we took to get married. We didn't get married in a Greek church. My mom, at least, is pretty religious. We're not having kids. My parents really wanted us to have kids, although they already have grandkids. So I didn't really understand why they're so worried about it. But
coming from all sides.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And my parents are very no filter types. So they kind of tell you what they think. My father immigrated here. So his English isn't that great anyway. So it sounds even harsher when he speaks to you in English and isn't happy about things. But yeah, so we had some bad interactions, and I had to kick my parents and my brother out of my wedding at the actual wedding for some bad things that they said. And it's been 2 years since we've talked. It's been tough, and my wife's had a hard time with it. I think she was really hoping to have good in-laws because her parents are fantastic. I love her parents; they're great. So I think it's a little disappointing for her, and I know it's been tough, and for me it's tough too because they're my parents, they're my brother, my sister. I grew up with all them, and we don't have any communication anymore. And like I said, I have a great life, and I always consider myself very fortunate with all the things that I have, and that's probably the one piece that stands out that's been a little bit tough to deal with at times. But honestly, I told my parents the last time I talked to them, it's important that you have family, but it's also important to treat everyone like family. You can't just assume that the title is enough to keep the relationship. And so, right. I don't want to say all the terrible things on here, if you don't mind. I don't want to drop too many bad words or anything like that. But my mom attacked my wife with some pretty bad verbal assaults, and my brother too. So it wasn't a great experience, but honestly, I'm lucky. I still have other family that's been good to us. We moved up here, and I have a little bit of extended family out here. My wife's parents just moved out here last month. So yeah, we're it was a tough experience, and I guess the reason I wrote it and considered publishing it, probably will pursue that, is that I think everybody has family and feel beholden to their family. But you also have to be treated as an equal, and I didn't have a relationship like that with my parents. So, it's just important that whoever you do have a relationship with, you consider them family, and you treat them as such, whether they are or not. Like Nick Whalen, for example, who I'm friends with, I consider him family, even though I barely know him. But yeah, it's a tough thing, man. And that's probably why I'm very involved with my wife, because it was obviously the not the threats, but the kind of the situation that happened with my family, it just made me that much closer to my wife. And I know how great of a person she is and how wrong my family was. So it was an easy decision.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, you go through things like that together as a couple, then it makes you stronger. I think that you bond tighter together, which is unfortunate that it has to happen in that way. But no, I mean, it was, from my perspective, like, I couldn't imagine like my parents feeling that way about my parents. My parents are divorced and whatever, so there would never be like a joint interaction or anything. But like, I couldn't imagine like my parents responding that way. So it was really interesting to read your story, and I appreciated you sharing it with me. Like, I don't know, I'm struggling to find good words for it. I guess it was just, if you ever do publish it, I definitely would encourage people to read it, and I always encourage people to publish stuff like that, just because. I mean, I think that's one of the themes of this podcast. Like, everybody has some sort of story to tell. So everybody has some sort of everybody has a little bit of baggage, if you don't mind
sure.
calling it that. I mean, I've put mine out there and all that, and it's just interesting to get to know people that in that way that you wouldn't from their football work is fascinating to me, and it's part of the reason why I do the show.
Oh yeah, my it's been a fun ride with my family. Fun is probably not the best word, but it was a long time coming, and unfortunately, it devolved and involved my wife, which it really shouldn't have. I think they had bigger issues that they were dealing with, and it's tough. But yeah, I love the stories too. I know Graham Barfield, when he was on, kind of talked about some issues he had in the past, and I can 100% sympathize. Mine goes back, 15 years with my parents of back and forths and, deceptions and all this fun stuff. And my whole family's pretty crazy to begin with. I tell my wife these stories and she 100% doesn't believe me, but I swear they're true. There's lawsuits in my family. There's been fist fights and embezzlements. And I mean, it's like a Greek, tragedy type of thing. And it's, yeah, I know, I appreciate the irony of it too, but, it's pretty crazy, man. And, my wife doesn't have that kind of background. Her family's pretty tight and close, and they don't have the drama that mine does. So, I'm always big on cutting out the drama if it exists and it doesn't really help you. And that's true in fantasy football too, to wind it back around.
Yeah.
I love a lot of the writers that are out there, but there are some that are tough to follow on social media because they get a little bit too, I don't know. I guess they go in directions that I'm not quite as keen on. I think everyone should definitely share their personal stories and their opinions and everything, but sometimes those opinions are a little bit more drastic than I would care to have as part of my timeline. So
yeah,
I don't have a problem cutting that out.
Well, that's a perfect kind of segue to the question that I've been asking a lot of people recently, and you can kind of expound on the point that you were making there. Obviously you listen to the show, I always end up asking the guests, like, what's something that you see in the industry that you don't really like or kind of rubs you the wrong way? And if you want to keep kind of expounding on what you were just saying, feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have a no asshole policy on mine, where I cut out anyone who starts attacking other writers or other people. That's a big no-no for me. I think there's a good way to go about it and have a discussion, and there's a bad way to go about it. And I think the anonymity and the platform of social media kind of lets people think that they have this free reign to go however they want. And I try to treat it more like a professional environment. I wouldn't want, especially if you're someone going full time, I would not want to have that social media resume, if you will, to contain all the stuff of oh, Matt Harmon, this article's so stupid and you're dumb, and why do you keep posting pictures of your dog, and your website's idiotic, or what I mean. But you have those people who do that stuff, and it's that's not productive to anybody, and it's you can just simply unfollow if you don't like what that person puts out. And so anyone who attacks in that way, I unfollow pretty quick. And honestly, any writer who does that too, I'm pretty quick to unfollow them, because I love a lot of people's work and I read a ton of stuff. And there are some people who are great in terms of interactions on Twitter. I definitely think you're one of them, who's very accessible and very polite and good to the people that you speak to. And I think that's the way you should do it. And I don't think that you're not entitled to defend your point. I totally think you are. If someone says, hey, I think you're wrong about Devin Smith or something, go ahead and defend yourself, but you don't need to get personal. And anytime someone does that, I kind of go in the opposite direction. But yeah, I kind of have that general thought in terms of the community as a whole. Anyone who's attacking websites or writers or anything like that, I find that a little bit lowbrow. And honestly, I just don't think that's the best way to go about it. I think you should speak with your own work and how good it is, and not have to worry about other people's work if you're trying to compete. Just put yours out there, and people will know it's better if you did a great job.
Yeah, like it kind of speaks to the earlier discussion about the film versus numbers debate. Like people will read the content if it's good. That's the thing. Like, what is the objective of like, bashing another person in the industry? Like, it doesn't necessarily, like other than getting attention, like what really is the point? Because it's not like gonna, what are you trying to take readers away from them and bring them to you? Like it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, and it's funny because, I think of it back to like my professional career, and I'm sure you can speak to it, prior to working full time. I mean, these communities are so small, like professional communities, as well as obviously the fantasy football community is small. Even if you don't attack the person directly, like if I attack someone, right, you're going to find out about it and you're not going to want to hire me, so to speak. You know what I mean? It's just not in your best interest to do that. And I just don't see the benefit of it. Even if you're someone who's already working full time, I mean, there's no benefit to treating people like that, because they're patroning your work, and you should be grateful that people find your work so valuable, just as they should be grateful that you're willing to share that work with them.
Yeah, for sure. It's just, it just seems strange to me, especially from a like working full-time perspective. Like, someday things might not work out at NFL, and I want to go somewhere else. It would be nice not to have burned every right. bridge in the book.
Well, and if you decide to get out of writing, who knows which follower is the one that helps you get into the field you want to do. It's good pretty point. Crazy, that people are so brash on social media. I guess I don't know. Maybe I just don't come from that type of background or something, and maybe I'm just a little too laid back. I've never actually had to block anybody or really like mute anyone. Like I've unfollowed people who I think just in general have been jerks to people, but I've never really gotten it myself, and maybe I've been very lucky. I'm sure you've had it, but I've been lucky.
Yeah. I don't mute or block that many people, honestly. Like it takes a lot to bug me in that sense. Like, well, I say I have like 3 like hard and fast rules. Like I'll block you if you say some racist shit, if you say some homophobic shit, or some or if you use the R word. Sure. That'll get you blocked immediately too, especially coming from where I used to work. Like those things I have no tolerance for. But like other than that, you can bash the hell out of me for a few tweets or disagree. I don't really care. If you're annoying, I might mute you, but I have a few people muted here and there. But yeah, it takes a lot to really to piss me off, I guess. Outside of like those 3 things, and I don't feel like I have that many people following me that would act like that anyways, or maybe I'm being idealistic. But George, this has been really great. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and especially after listening to all the episodes. This is the gold star you get. But before we get out of here, I always like to give the guests one last shot at the floor with any parting words before we sign off. So before I yank it out from under you, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I know that you do this too, because like I said, I listened to all the episodes, but I couldn't prepare anything necessarily. I said, I'm just gonna wing it and see what happens and how the conversation leads me to whatever this might be.
By the way, I love that Steve Palazzolo in his episode, like he was the first one that like ever commented on that. He was like, you do this to all your guests and nobody seems to really like this part.
I actually like it. I think everyone comes up with good stuff. I think everyone's a little bit nervous at first, to come up with the right thing to say. I don't think there is a right thing.
I was gonna say there really is no right thing to say. Just say whatever the hell you want.
Yeah, honestly, like, and I'll probably reiterate things that I've said throughout the podcast here, but it's all about finding, that thing that makes you happy in life. And, there's no reason to pursue this, whether it's part-time or full-time, if the rest of your life is not going too well. I don't mean that in like a income way or a economic, anything like that. I mean, just simply, if you're not satisfied with your home life or your your work life, if you're doing it part-time, it's going to be very difficult for you to thrive in this community. I think you have to come in, honestly, very optimistic, very excited, and you have to keep that excitement. And that can be hard, to keep that excitement. There's some people who might try to beat you down a bit or disparage your work, or, maybe you don't have much success in the beginning, but I think it's just important just to be happy and enjoy it. And really, the people that are in this community, I'll say the ones that I've met, whether it's in person or, through podcasts or on Twitter or whatever, I mean, they're all very helpful. I've had a lot of luck reaching out to people and talking and learning a ton and getting help myself. So, I always say don't be scared of that stuff, man. The worst thing you're going to get is a rejection. And, if it's anything like my high school prom, rejection's kind of the course of action. So, it's not a big deal. You kind of pick yourself up and you go to the next one and you ask again, and that's okay. And like I said, there's a lot of great people out there, and hopefully I can be a resource in my small way as well, whether it's even helping one person out. I definitely love to do that as well. So, I guess that's it.
Perfect. Well, that was you stepped up to the plate wonderfully there with the hardest question of the podcast, apparently that people are catching on to. But George, again, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate it, and thank you for listening and always sharing the episodes. Again, gold star to you for that. And if you're not following George, definitely RotoHack on Twitter. Very, very good follow. He's got a lot of good information. The podcast that he's on are one of the many thousands that I listened to whilst on the road. So I definitely, of course, endorse that. But and everybody listening, thank you guys so much. We're kind of winding down here towards the end of what will be season 1 of the Backyard Banter podcast. I really appreciate everybody tuning in and following along. Continue to share the show, and we'll continue to make this thing the best that it can possibly be. So again, thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today.